The views, comments, and opinions of the following program do not necessarily reflect those of Morris Media Studios, MorrisMediaLive.com, or its affiliates. Listener discretion is advised.
Good day. We want to greet you from Los Angeles, specifically Leimert Park. It is a joy to have you with us here at Faith Without Borders. I'm your host, Pastor Calvin Sauls, and it is indeed a joy for me to have you with us here at Faith Without Borders. It is all about thought-provoking conversation as well as solutions-driven dialogue. And as always, we try to get to the bottom of a challenge, an issue, a crisis, and to inform you, to educate you about it, and then to really see how we can talk about solutions, especially, some of the things that you can do around the issue that we're dealing with. And sometimes I'm a little uncomfortable using the word issue because most of the time we're talking about individuals. We're talking about people. And so it's always a challenge for me to use the word issues because people are not issues. People, are human beings with dignity. And that's what today's show is going to be all about. We are going to be talking about the crisis of blacks at the border. And it's going to be a very, very, informative and powerful experience. Because of who I have as my guest, I have my kin sister warrior. That's what I call her, attorney Nana Gyamfi. She's the executive director of the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, as well as the co-founder for Justice Warriors for Black Lives. Nana and I have been working here in Los Angeles for several years now, and she is my sister, and I'm so glad for her leadership and her commitment to making sure that racial justice come about for everyone, but especially, for black people. And so glad that she's at the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. And so I just want to welcome attorney Nana Gyamfi. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to see you.
Very good to see you.
We're running past each other.
I know.
We're texting past each other.
I know.
We're tweeting past each other. What else?
Posting past each other and gramming past each other and everything else.
Well, I'm so glad we're able to set this up, and thank you for making the time because I know your schedule is crazy.
This is important.
Yes. So we wanted to just today really get but before we go there, I'm just struck by what happened this past week. Wow. In the impeachment hearings. Of course, the most of the folk who were testifying were immigrants.
Yes.
And so it seems as if there was a sweeping spirit or atmosphere of positivity around immigrants. Okay, I've wondered about that. I've been thinking about it.
I didn't think about that, but that is true.
The people who've chosen, to be, American. And then the word I heard for the first time was when they were talking about John Bolton. They said, well, John Bolton need to woman up. And then somebody took it to the next level. They said, well, in light of, those who testified, John Bolton need to immigrant up. I'm like, whoa!
I know, right? No, very interesting. It's very interesting. This impeachment is bringing out some things that I'm sure the president doesn't want to have brought out, right? In terms of really what we're looking at now. Right. Because when we talk about this Make America Great Again, we know that it is based upon racism. particularly anti-blackness, that it's based upon xenophobia, that it's based upon patriarchy. And so for him to look up now, we haven't seen the black faces yet,
right,
okay? Right. But we are talking about the Ukraine. I don't know how many black faces we're going to see, but we have seen that immigrant. We have seen women, right? We have seen women who are immigrants, right? And come from immigrant families be really central to this conversation, but also on both sides. I mean, to some of the immigrant is the closer immigrant, let's say as you, as someone that came from South Africa, or myself as someone, a Ghanaian sister born in San Francisco, but like a Japanese car made in Kansas, still
right.
Ghanaian. And then you got, the other folks that are a little more generations, like the Giulianis,
Right. Yeah. So,
right?
so I was just
interesting.
I was just taken aback by just all of a sudden just sense of positivity going on, even though, not too long ago, the Supreme Court took on DACA.
Right.
And I mean, it's just interesting, the double standard,
right.
In the United States, when we talk about you got an immigrant up, clearly
right.
we're trying to say you got a white immigrant up.
All right. I'm about to say, now, what did I say earlier? We're not seeing any black folks, which would include black immigrants, right? So we know when they say immigrant up and woman up, who they're referring to.
Yeah. So, but let's get to the task at hand. I just, I was kind of a little, sidetracked by that, but I got that off my chest.
There we go.
The Black Alliance for Just Immigration. Can you tell us a little bit about, the organization, its mission, its purpose, and then we'll talk about the very, important work, that's going on, especially around, black immigrants in California, and then of course, today we want to get into black immigrants, on the border. And you shared even some more info, with me, so we'll get to that too. But a little bit about our beloved Budgie.
Absolutely. So the Black Alliance for Just Immigration is a racial justice organization. We organize, we advocate, we educate on behalf of black immigrants, but also work to unite black immigrants and African Americans to push for racial, social, economic justice. It was founded by brilliant people, including my beloved brother here, Reverend Sauls, and Gerald Lenoir and others who saw that all black folks weren't necessarily multi-generational African American.
Yeah.
All immigrants were not Latinx or Hispanic or Latino, Latina. Now I'm getting attacked for all the words I use, but weren't brown folks, right? Yeah. And so really critical and critically bring up the invisibilized black immigrant into the immigrant rights movement and also in the racial justice movement. And so really pleased to be the ED, just started this year. And I keep trying to say I'm new and people are like, no, you would be walking by now, right? So newness you don't get to claim. And we continue to push and to do the work, whether on the national and the local level. We're in Los Angeles, Oakland, Miami, Atlanta, DC. Excuse me, New York is our headquarters. Minnesota, we got a person there that, one that's there per one that goes back and forth. And then, of course, we do things on the national level.
Yeah. So I say my beloved Budgie because that's what it is to me. And I'm just excited about your leadership and thank you for stepping up and stepping in, on just as a critical time.
Absolutely.
And of course, Budgie's voice is just essential. It is powerful. And as we will hear, it is very, very impactful, as well. I'll never forget the first email I sent, about 12 plus years ago that kind of kickstarted, the formation of Budgie. And it was all about when we saw all the marches, of immigrants and the protest, went on nationally.
Right.
I was looking at all these images. I'm like, I don't see any, I don't see any black folk. In terms of that. And so the tweet that I wrote in essence basically said, that I am just very, very challenged by the absence, of black immigrants and the silence of African Americans. Really working at bridging, just the black experience, between those two communities, which I think, is just so essential around that. And of course, we got very, very interesting responses to that, because I sent it to a group of about, 150 to 200 people.
Wow.
And so it was interesting to get all the responses, some positive, some negative. But but we pressed through that, and here we are, and just very, very excited about, what Budgie is doing. We know you talked about the invisibilization of, black immigrants, and that's certainly, what's happening. And that's why we wanted to do this bridging between African Americans and black immigrants, because that experience, though unique, is kind of similar,
right.
in terms of that. So let's talk a little bit about the state of, black immigrants in California, because I know Budgie has done some work around that. Do you want to just give us some insight around that?
Absolutely. So we issued a report, the State of Black Immigrant California. So we had a national one that we've done a couple of years ago, but we issued a report last year where we really zeroed down on California, looking not just at demographics, but also looking at employment, looking at housing, looking at education. Some of it wanting to be able to get at the root of some of the stereotypes of what people do and who people are, and, how people may or may not be taking over people's jobs and taking over people's education and taking over people's housing. And so we wanted to make sure that we could capture and really look at the data on what is really happening with black immigrants and how does that compare to what's happening with African Americans. And so I think it's important, especially in this time period. It's interesting because when we were doing the research for the report, we didn't know that a person was going to be elected who would be so, skilled, frankly, at separating populations, right? And separating demographics, right? We didn't realize that. We didn't know that we were going to be dealing with someone who was going to be telling African Americans, hey, these people over here, including black immigrants, are your enemy. These people are taking your jobs. These people who are not Americans are being put at a pedestal higher than you. But so I appreciate sort of the vision of Budgie. This is before me, right? When Opal Tometi was the executive director. And so the vision to be able to see, with Opal and the team that, hey, we've got to get this stuff in writing we've got to update to be able to really look at what is happening with black folks. And so you see in the report, for example, that 19% of black immigrants live below the poverty line.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So this idea that we're all here, engineers, doctors, and lawyers, right, taking up and sucking up all of the good jobs that African Americans have or had is just not true. Our numbers are similar in terms of the poverty level. Our numbers are similar in terms of unemployment. Our numbers are similar in terms of underemployment. Many, many of the black immigrants that you have driving you in these ride shares, working as security guards, they have bachelor's and master's degrees. Some of them have doctorates back home that over here are not treated with any kind of respect. And then they have to also go through the immigration process. And so they're not able to be, to get in that space. So they might be a bank director in Cote d'Ivoire, right? Where they speak French. Come here. No one's doing any French help for them.
Right.
So they got to deal with this language access issue, assuming they speak a colonizer language like French.
Right.
And then you've got to figure out how do you get one of these banks, Chase and Wells Fargo and the others, to decide that you, a brother,
right,
let alone a brother that's not from here, with an accent and what they would consider a funny name, should now be a bank director at that bank, right? And so the brother is a cab driver instead, because that's where we are, or now becomes a nurse, because that opens up, and the language of medicine, right? The mechanics of medicine are the same all over the world. So being able to point out those kinds of things, that our housing opportunities are not there. We don't have credit. Many of us come from countries where we don't know what credit is.
Right.
So it may not be that we have bad credit, but no credit. And some of us have bad credit because the first time, it's almost like what they push on the college students, right? It's the first time we've really dealt with credit cards and don't have that financial literacy to understand what to do with them. So a lot of the issues that we face as black immigrants are similar to the issues that African Americans face, but we don't have the historical and the educational, in terms of informational is a better word, background to understand what's happening. So my brother from Nigeria is coming and saying, I don't know why. Every time at my job, they don't do this for me and they do it for other people. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, do you think it's because you're black? I thought of that, but I'm not black.
Right.
I'm like, no, actually, you are black, right? And having to have that conversation. And so there's a lot that we experience as black immigrants that if you ask some of us, right? I'm talking about some of us, not necessarily folks like me who were born here or folks who came young, but older black folks, right? Mm-hmm. If you ask black immigrant folks, is this discrimination? They don't want to say yes, right? They either don't recognize it or they feel like that's shameful. Mm-hmm. And so they don't talk about it. So when you ask them, they'll say, I've never experienced discrimination, because they think experiencing discrimination is like a disgrace. Right. So they want to say, I've never had this disgrace.
Or you've done something wrong.
Right. I've never been stopped by the police. I've never been to jail. They're lying. Yeah. They have been stopped by the police. Or they have been to jail on a DUI or, whatever. But because that they still have that stigma, they don't want to admit to it, right? Yeah. And so it makes it seem as if we're not having similar experiences when we absolutely are.
No, absolutely. And of course, the challenge then becomes, especially now, people dealing with this on a personal level, but not really get into the institutional strategies. That's all a part of it, the systemic, pieces. And Baji, I think has done a great job just helping folk understand, just this, local, national, and global, migration experience. But not just that, but the economic and the, and the racial forces that contribute, to this in terms of just understanding, saying that they're here to take my job, is not adequate analysis for what actually is going on, right? Economically around it, right?
Absolutely. I mean, when we have an understanding that it is not the worker who sets up the job, what jobs are available or not available. Mm-hmm. It is not the worker who decides who is going to pick up that job, right? And so it is Amazon in Minnesota that decides that it's going to have these warehouse workers and that it is easier for them in terms of their capacity to exploit for those workers to be Somalian women.
Right.
Now, the Somalian women are like, oh, you must be confused. We have labor unions in our country and we're about to say no and lock up and demand certain wages and demand certain. Now, all of a sudden, they're not such a desirable worker anymore. Right. And so the issue is not what we are doing in terms of whether you're talking about black immigrants, African Americans, or other immigrants that are coming in and being exploited by this labor system that we have here in this country that was built on plantation capitalism. That's right. The issue is the plantation owners. Mm-hmm. The issue is massa and trying to figure out, okay, how do we dismantle this plantation capitalist system? How do we operate in a solidarity economics, as our friend Manuel Pastor talks about, right? How do we talk about economics that are based upon our solidarities as opposed to based upon this competition model that's been put out there? And so, even with Baji, I'm always sitting and thinking of things. And so that's one of my conversations that I want to have. Mm-hmm. We have like Pan and Sister Nunu, who had the Diaspora Dialogues, right? And then we've been doing Unite the Diaspora Dialogues, but really sitting down with folks, which I plan to do over the next couple of weeks, and say, especially with African Americans, but also with black immigrants of different generation, right? And say, what do you want? If you're African American, what do you want black immigrants to do? What do you want black immigrants to know about your history and about your concerns? And then what do you want us to do? Because you can't say to someone, or I don't think you're saying, I want you to be houseless, jobless, without education or health care. I'm assuming that that's not what you're saying. Right. Mm-hmm. What you're saying is, I don't want to not have health care. I feel like if I don't have health care because you have health care, I feel like I'm not getting into these colleges because you're getting into these colleges, right? I feel like I'm not getting these jobs because you're getting these jobs. Which, of course, will cause the staff to sit down and see if that's the case. Right. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to tell me how I can be in solidarity with you.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And the same, goes for Black immigrants. Instead of looking and maybe having our notions of how African Americans are not helping and not doing this and that for us, really having the conversation about what do we want them to do? These are people that have lived in this country for 400 years, built this country, right? And this citizenship that they keep telling us we want, they've had it since 1865, and it hasn't helped them. Right? So how do we have a conversation about what we want them to do, recognizing what position African Americans are in this country, and vice versa?
I mean, the dialogue is essential, because then we can understand that the competition, for the most part, is based on a system rooted in dehumanization and exploitation.
Right.
And I think that's just critical. And once we are able to invite people into the dialogue and the conversation and begin to hear people's stories of both pain and power and possibility, right?
Yes.
Because it's not just about pain.
Exactly.
It's rooted in pain. But, as I always say, pain is a pathway for new possibilities, and that's what African Americans did in this country. And so to get to know and understand that story, and then for African Americans to get to know and understand the story of, immigrants, that's powerful, because now we are able to go deep in our analysis, systemically, institutionally, broaden the circle of concern, and then to try and see, okay, look, we kind of in this together,
right?
Which is really, when we, worked on budget at the outset, we said that, we look at our mission, our vision, our goal is that the immigrant rights movement must connect with the unfinished agenda of the civil rights movement,
right? To
try and see how we can build a global human rights movement.
And that's the only way it's going to happen.
All these things are connected.
That's the only way it's going to happen. You're right. When I have conversations, we talk about the migration, the great migrations of African Americans out of the South, up north, into the Midwest, into the West. I have the conversation. What were they running from?
Right.
Social terror in the form of, racism and anti-Blackness, economic terror, right? And political terror.
Right.
And when we look at our siblings that are coming from the continent and
they're
the Caribbean.
They're coming for vacation.
Yeah, they're not coming for Disneyland, as my father would say, right? They are running from ethnic terror, right? And racial terror, depending on what country you're talking about, right? But something about who they were born, how they were born, right? The terror because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, some inalienable piece of them, right? They're running because of economic terror.
Right.
They're being displaced because of capitalism and global capitalism and how it plays out, plantations, capitalism everywhere. And they're running from political terror, right? Political, governments that are wreaking havoc on and preying, killing the populations. And so we should be able to share that, and we should be able to share how we got over.
That's right.
Right? Because we're still here, right? And then we should be able to share how we dismantle this thing and build something new and push through.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so the goal is to see how we can then unite in what has happened to us, and then through that unity move to solidarity in terms of how we can come together, work together towards everybody's freedom and liberation.
Absolutely.
In terms of that. Let's move down south. I know I've been part of several delegations that has gone down to the U.S.-Mexico border, to Tijuana. We were there with Budgie.
Yes.
We were there with Haitian Bridge Alliance.
Yes.
We were there with the International Society of Black Latinos. And we've just seen the challenges, the pain, the devastation, the marginalization, of our Haitian, migrants who are there, as well as African migrants, from Ethiopia and elsewhere. Would you share a little bit about, the work that Budgie has done in terms of just gathering information of what's going on, assessing the root causes, and then continuing to see, how we can work towards some strategic solutions, for what's going on around blacks at the border?
Absolutely. So Baji has had a couple of trips. I found out recently there was one trip that was way long ago that you probably know about.
That's right,
that I
yeah.
didn't know about. That was long ago.
That was the one to the U.S.-Arizona border.
Yes.
And yes, I was a part of that.
Okay. I was like, oh, that happened? Okay, that's good to know. Baji been in the mix. Always on the cutting edge, right? Baji's been, there since then, right? And gone, not necessarily on a regular basis like every month, but every couple of years, every 2 or 3 years, gone out to see what's happening. The last, the one before, let's say December of 2018, was in, I believe, 2016, 2017, and our report, Black at the Border, came out after that. But we've been there and seen since 2015, at very minimum, this real presence of, in the beginning, Haitian migrants who had come after doing, the building and the development of all those gorgeous buildings that folks saw during the World Cup and the Olympics in Brazil. Then shortly thereafter, folks remember the fascist government of Brazil began its rise, and a country where the police kill 6 black people a day clearly is not a country that you necessarily want to be in if you can get out. And so Haitians left. The work had dried up, and the anti-blackness, and in particular anti-black immigrant increased. Yes. So they were like, okay, we've got to get out of here, and they spread. In this time period also, where we saw this, especially in 2015, this increase in austerity all over the world, especially in the West, that then impinged upon other countries, causing you to have more conflict, climate change and the effect that it's had on other countries, especially on the continent, this push of the sort of right-wing Christianity that presses homophobia and transphobia and has just exported that all over the darn world. You now find all of these Africans trying to leave their countries. And at first they were heading north. So they were going to the Mediterranean. And then country after country in Europe started saying, like Italy just passed something that says if you save someone, you are in trouble. You're not allowed to save drowning people, right? If you help, you get fined. You could, be in trouble in criminal court. And so and then Libya and all of the enslavement, organ harvesting, everything that's happening there, people have decided to try their luck through the southern border. And so we see now, starting in December of 2018, we had a group of us, we formed with Justice Warriors. At that time, it wasn't the ED, the Black Migrant Legal Support Network. Right. And so we went down with the delegation, and that's when we first found out. We ran into 3 Eritreans, and we're like, oh yeah, come back. They had some paper. They don't speak Spanish, that they thought was giving them benefits. Because normally, when you are a refugee asylee, the country that you go in, because of these declarations that they've signed or these international law agreements, you're supposed to help them. So they were thinking, okay, where do we go to get like the help while we wait to apply for asylum in the U.S.? So we said, come back and talk to us and we'll help you. We're going to do like a little legal clinic. Turns out they had gotten a letter telling them they had 15 days to leave the country. That they were being deported.
In Spanish.
In Spanish. It was a deportation letter. Not a come get some benefits letter. So, of course, they were shocked, disappointed. But that's when our regular work in Tijuana began. Because it was clear when we went there that there were many more people than we thought. That it wasn't sort of this story of the Haitians and how they've opened up restaurants. And, that there are Haitians that are sleeping in tents, that are sleeping outside. Like, it's not like they've just assimilated and the Mexicans have just accepted them and everything's fine, right? But then also that we have these Africans. When the 3 came back, they came back with 24 others Eritreans. Wow. 24 others. It was like, what? We didn't even know. The 3 of you were shocked by, right? But we had all of these people on the team, and in particular the Baji team, who were Ethiopian that went. Zerihun Yilma, who is now our chair, Tadios Bele, doctor, let me not forget the doctor.
That's right.
Tadios Bele.
He's a doctor now.
That's
He'll be the doctor.
That's right. Who is our LA clinic coordinator. We had Sion Gurmu, who's our staff attorney and legal manager. She's out of New York. We had our sister Hamanut, Haptu, who is an attorney here that's been doing this work long as me, but in the immigration world. And so they were so happy, tears. People were crying to be able to see people that you could, because you know the folks on the horn, we can tell who they are, to see their horn folks, right? But then also to speak their language.
That's right.
When they've been hearing this foreign language that they do not speak, they don't understand, and they've just been operating with the power of the universe and the spirits, you know what I'm saying? And the creator of the universe, that's it. They haven't had a language understanding. And so what we found every time we go is that we have more and more different types of African folks that are there. The Cameroonians are the big group right now. The Haitians are always going to be a big group. The Eritreans, Ethiopians are there. The Jamaicans are there. The Congolese are there. Sierra Leoneans are there. And so it's getting more and more of a diversity. And we'll talk about Tapachula in a moment, but I can see how that could be based upon who we're seeing at that southern Mexico border, who's trying to head up. And so we're talking about a situation in which people don't have access to food. They don't have access to water. They don't have access to the basics, sanitation. Women don't have access to, the hygienic products that they need in terms of menstruation. Babies, we're hearing reports, and we went just now with the Congressional Black Caucus, and we'll talk about that in just a second. They reported babies being born right there on the sidewalk because people cannot access the hospital, right? Because they're being denied access. Children being denied access in school. Teachers are just straight saying, we don't know how to teach black children. Like there's some kind of special something that allows you to teach black children, right? And so it really is a humanitarian crisis created by the U.S. foreign policy of 44 and a half, who threatened Mexico with tariffs. And Mexico, who's supposed to have the most progressive president they've ever had, and probably in all of so-called Latin America, suddenly decided, oh, no, now we're going to change everything. We're going to violate international law. We're going to, in so many ways that we'll describe and talk about, and we're going to do that to avoid these tariffs. And if that means that black people die, if that means that indigenous migrants die, if that means, that children die, that's okay, because we got to keep these tariff stuff off.
So it's just the devaluing, of black lives, the indiscriminate, actions taking place, that adversely affect those who are there. And I mean, when we were there at a church, we all kind of, I know you all in another part of Tijuana, we were another, and we all connected. And then we actually had a gathering. We had to deal with some language barrier that cropped up, around distributing the goods that we brought. And we want to thank, SCIU, 712, because we did it with them, and we did it with, We Will Live, a Black and Brown coalition that we all are part of here. But we had to work through that, in terms of just the language and the fact that, inadvertently, folk were just sidelined, because they couldn't speak Spanish, and how we had to quickly deal with that in terms of what we brought is for everybody. And not just, for, the light-skinned folk first and then the dark-skinned folk second, in terms of that. But I was just, and then afterwards we went into kind of like a private meeting strategy session, just to talk about, this. And I think people just have to realize that this is a humanitarian crisis that's going down, at the border, and how, denying folk access, is really the second act, because the first act really, is the political and economic policies, of the U.S. Around the world, and in this case, towards Mexico.
The U.S. foreign policy affects the whole thing. It says why you're leaving Cameroon, and then it says how you are being treated as a Cameroonian along the way. So, folks went in through Ecuador. Most Africans came through Ecuador. So what does the U.S. do? They put pressure on Ecuador. have visa requirements when they didn't.
Right.
What does the U.S. do? It puts pressure on Colombia to have visa requirements when it didn't. So it literally, this administration has built a wall. It's not the physical wall they were talking about, but it is this invisible wall of foreign policy between third safe country agreements with countries that are not safe to their own people who are fleeing, right? What they're doing with the trade policy in Mexico. And then again, the use of money, right, of aid, of the carrot and the hammer with countries like Ecuador, Colombia. They're talking about speaking to Panama, right, to try to get all of these countries to violate international human law in terms of the right of asylees to seek asylum in the country of their choice. And their choice is the United States. But they're being required now to seek asylum in all these other countries on the way.
Right.
And this is all based on U.S. foreign policy.
Right, yeah. That's very interesting because the enslavement route, basically, provided access for all African folk throughout those countries.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, they're being denied that. And I'm quite taken aback that a person in Mexico can say, I don't know how to teach a black child, and not realizing that, that Africa is Mexico's third route, in terms of, going back in the day.
Yeah,
anyway,
ask your grandma.
It's just
you know what I'm saying? Ask your grandma how you teach a black child.
Convenient amnesia, in terms of that. I know we've worked, in general, but in particular, Baji, to get the Congressional Black Caucus, down there just to, come and just see for yourselves, that, these reports are not being made up.
Right.
And I'm always glad and proud that my congresswoman was down there.
Yes.
Who chairs the Congressional Black Caucus. That's Congresswoman Karen Bass. I also saw, others there. I saw, Congresswoman Barbara Lee.
Yes.
So my heart was just warm when I saw. I'm like, oh yes, this is great. So tell us about, the delegation. I know there were some hearings, and you're going to show some pictures, about it while we talk about it. So a little bit about the purpose of that trip and what the experience of it and just what came out of it.
So Baji, every first Saturday, we were going, sort of on and off. And then we decided after everything jumped off in Tapachula that we would start going more regularly to Tijuana. So every first Saturday, we go down to Tijuana so that we can help with legal workshops and humanitarian aid. And so for the most part, our team was there that does that work. And at this trip, we've been talking to the CBC. And so between myself and Representative Bass, because she was on it, as soon as I talked to her, she was like, yes, that's what we need to do.
Right.
She invited me to even speak to the CBC at one of their smaller meetings where they meet, have lunch, and talk about what's going on with them. And everyone agreed, right? And all of the, the folks were there from the elder rock stars to the newest rock stars, right? And everyone was like, yes, this is something that needs to happen. But now, now we got to coordinate schedules and do all of those things. And so we were so pleased to get the call that said, yes, I know it's not a lot of notice, but we can make this happen. I was like, look, I don't care. If we can make it happen, let's make it happen now.
That's right.
And so there were two things that happened, two very separate things. I want to make sure that we have them separate in people's brains. One was a CBC visit, or a visit from CBC members to talk directly to migrants, to go into Tijuana, speak with migrants, and hear directly from migrants. And so Representative Bass, Karen Bass, came out, which is lovely because we got, and we have an office right here in L.A.
That's right.
Representative Barbara Lee came out. Representing Oakland, right? And then Representative Yvette Clark came out, daughter of immigrants herself, right? Just like me, from Jamaica, from the beautiful island of Jamaica, she always says. And she represents the Republic of Brooklyn, where we have our headquarters.
The Republic of Brooklyn.
The Republic of Brooklyn, where we have our headquarters. And so it was also lovely to have the representatives that we go to, that we speak to about these issues, right? Really take that concern. These are three of the most powerful Congress people in Congress, right? And Barbara Lee is on that appropriations committee and is the chair in that committee, really important in that committee. And Yvette Clarke is with Energy and Commerce, which is a very important committee, but also on the committee that deals with Homeland Security. And then, of course, we have Chairwoman Bass, the chair of the CBC, who also is the chair of the subcommittee on Africa and global human rights, right? Was part of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And so them coming and hearing this is information they can take back, right? And as they're sitting on these committees and looking at that work and deal with, they heard from Cameroonians, they heard, there were Haitians there, Jamaicans, and also Sierra Leoneans. It was so difficult. The trauma that people are experiencing and that people have experienced. I mean, there are people who just spoke through their sobs. There was one man, he started to tell the story. He was so halting, you wanted to know, does he speak English, right? But he was from Sierra Leone. You realize he did because when he could speak, it wasn't English. But at some point, he was just like, I can't. Like he said, like 6 words. And in between those words was like 2 minutes of silent pause where we were just encouraging him, to take your time. To say, finally, and he put his head in his hands and he had kept that position for 45 minutes. Another sister from Cameroon who's like, this is the first time I'm telling my story. I think everyone was telling their story except for 1 or 2 for the first time. And just crying through that. A sister there's a Jamaican trans woman talking about being raped, being beaten, being thrown down the stairs by the person who's supposed to be the leader in one of the LGBTQ shelters. Because again, these are not black places. So this anti-blackness just plays itself out.
Right.
And it adds to the trauma that is already a trauma, right? That would be a trauma for anyone.
Right.
It adds to that trauma and languages that they don't understand and, all of those other pieces. And so you could see Representative Juan Vargas joined us, who represents the border, interestingly, not just alongside California, but all the way into Arizona. So we just learned that. So that was interesting. I was like, oh, good. Come here. We're going to talk more. He was on point. He was talking, saying things that made sense. He said, after I hear about all this anti-blackness and LGBTQ, abuse, he said, metering, we know this metering system where they make you take a number like you're at the butcher shop and then you're waiting months and months to be called just to claim asylum. He said, we know that's illegal because you're supposed to just be able to present yourself and ask for asylum. He said, but at very minimum, black migrants, based on the anti-blackness and their inability to speak English, and Spanish, and LGBTQ migrants and the abuse they should have almost like a humanitarian parole. They shouldn't have to even deal with this metering. Strong words like that, right? And Barbara Lee, she used the word dehumanizing about 50 times, right? And you could tell that they were so moved in the room. You could also tell that the folks who were speaking to them, the black asylum seekers, that they were moved, right? By the fact that folks were there. Our whole team was there.
To listen.
Just to listen. Our whole team was there. Mulu Alamayu, who is an attorney who goes down with our team when we go, on the monthly basis. She did a great job asking questions because these are people that she talks to. And, she was able to pull out this information and get people to tell stories that had never done that before. Our sister Belinda Ado is there. She's a nurse. And she has her own organization, Global Health Forum, that goes to different places in the world to offer clinics for free. And so she saw a post I did on the Ghana Association and wrote back and said, my sister, tell me what I need to do. And she's been a part of it as well and talked about the trauma. And we need folks, faith leaders. We need folks who are psychologists, counselors, cultural artists to come down with us on Saturday.
Right.
So that we can help people to understand.
So we'll definitely work on that because we connected with some groups that have knowledge about this crisis, and they've already shown that they're willing to step up in terms of that. So we'll definitely work on that.
And let me just say this really briefly: so we also had a committee hearing, which is a separate thing. That was a congressional hearing, separate from the CBC, with the subcommittee on Africa. Those 4 representatives I mentioned, and then also Representative Sylvie Davis, and 4 of us, including myself, Amnesty International, an attorney that used to be an asylum officer, and then someone from the Jewish Law Center that's in San Diego. We all spoke about what was happening. I was pleased to be able to bring Blackness to the table and to the conversation. But it was the forefront of the conversation because it was something that Representative Bass had brought for that purpose, for us to shine a light and to make visible those, the African and Caribbean asylum seekers that are trying to get help. And it's the first time, both historic, first time CBC goes to Tijuana. They've been to other parts of the border, but not Tijuana, to speak specifically with Black migrants. First time that the Subcommittee on Africa and Global Human Rights has an official congressional hearing at the border to talk about what's happening with migrants at the border and featuring African migrants and Caribbean migrants.
And that is powerful. And certainly we know that, especially those who are heading up, those committees, that there will be some action coming out of that. Quickly, what are some next steps around this visit? And then we're going to, go into, some even more challenging, pieces about this.
So, there was a commitment that they made a bazillion times, so they can't go back on it.
Okay.
To come back.
Okay.
But to come back to first of all, to come back, right? And to get more information because there's only so much time that they had. They also want to visit Ota Mesa, which is the detention center, private detention center out there in San Diego, where our brother, Nabani Abinyui, who was 37-year-old Cameroonian, first person to die in ICE custody in their new fiscal year. So their fiscal year started October 1st, and he died October 1st. We're still trying to get the information as to what happened with him. Baji's part of a larger coalition that includes BLMP, Brother Ola, that includes Haitian Bridge Alliance, Undocu Black, even the Minnesota Black Immigrant Coalition, right? Coming to the table and trying to see what we can do to be of assistance. And so she told everyone, Representative Bass, this is what really made me know I have to come here, so I got to go back. And so they're going to go to Ota Mesa the next time they come. Okay. Also, they talked about specific policy recommendations. Barbara Lee talked about some things in appropriations, holding some money over here and giving some money over there, specifically with regard to the plight of Black migrants. So that was fantastic.
That's right.
And then Yvette Clarke talked about what she could do and what ideas she might have coming out of her work with Homeland Security. And so we are expecting another border trip. We expect there'll be more folks, right? That there'll be more folks from the CBC that'll come after they hear about how powerful it was, and that there'll be some things that are happening legislatively that now finally address that issue.
Yeah. So keep us posted on that so that we can try and see how we can get folk from here, down there to be supportive.
Absolutely.
Around that. We've talked about California. We've talked about the border. But, we know that something else that's going on that I don't know whether a lot of people know about this, and that is how U.S. foreign policy has really moved the border, straight up into, Central America.
Yes.
Because of the economic and other policies that it has, the strangle that it's trying to bring on some of those countries. And I know that Budget's be doing some work, around what's going on about that, as well as the fact that even, we're talking about folk being in Tijuana. There are folk in Mexico that can't even get to, Tijuana or to the U.S. border. Let's talk a little bit about Tapachula.
So what happened, I started getting calls around March or April from a comrade of mine, Arturo, that is also an attorney. But no. So Arturo, right? And Arturo is my kind of attorney. You know what I mean? We share the same politics and the same vibe. Like you see us down there, you can't even tell we're attorneys, right? We are with the people.
Arturo is our man in Mexico who knows what's going down.
Who knows what's going down. So he's the one that contacted me and said, hey, Nana, there's all these Black migrants now. Like there's always been some Haitians, but now I'm talking to people that are from Congo and from the Cameroon. And so, but I need you. Like I'm talking to them and I'm trying to do my best, but they need to see Black faces. And so I said, okay, Arturo, let's see what we can do. And so while we were, and this is now, I just started in January, right? So I'm trying to figure it out. And then in March, I'm trying to get the CBC. We're trying to see what we can do. So I finally was able to go for the first time in August with Refuge for Families, which is a coalition organization. Suma Arias of Firm, who was at that time the field director and now is a director with Community Change. She was the one that contacted me and said, look, you're not part of this Refuge for Families, but Baji going to come on this trip because we need someone that's going to give us the analysis and do the work that needs to be done on behalf of Black migrants. And so I went, and it was to Guatemala and to Tapachula. So in Guatemala is where I learned about this third safe country agreements, what it would mean, right? And so the United States entered into an agreement with Guatemala that basically said, we're going to designate you as a safe country for asylum seekers, to be able to seek asylum in. Now, Guatemala literally is not safe for the indigenous and Garifuna of Guatemala who are running out of the country, fleeing for their lives. They had killed 28 human rights defenders in 2018. By the time we went there in 2019, by July of 2019, they had killed 24. So they were like doubling their pace, right? I was told directly to my face, do not be out here in the streets by yourself because they will take you to the detention center. They'll be looking at your name. Even with that U.S. passport, they're going to be like, whatever. They're going to think it's a fraudulent, because I don't have all my names is the African type. So they would be tracking you right to the detention center. They only have one that their human rights commissioner described, looked straight at me and said, it is slave ship-like condition.
Wow.
And then begin to describe all of that, right? And so now we have this third safe country, not just with Guatemala, but with Honduras being done and with El Salvador being done, which is one stopgap. Okay. Used to be you could just walk straight through, but now you're going to be detained in slave ship-like conditions. And then you're going to be, you have to apply for asylum. You got to sit around until you get rejected because they don't want their own Black people. So they don't want you and then get through to Tapachula. So Tapachula is really where you are stopped. Okay. Tapachula has a detention center that they call a shelter. They call it a refuge. That's literally the word they use. Called Siglo 21, Century 21. It is the largest detention center in Latin America. That's their claim to fame. In that center, when you get to Tapachula, when you cross the border, you must go and present yourself. And when you present yourself, you are immediately detained. That's the process. Women are detained with children. There's no bail and all that. You don't bond out. You don't have any of those possibilities. Right. When you go there, you go through a process in which you have to apply for asylum by force, right? They notify your country that you're fleeing from that, hey, this person is here and Reverend Sauls is here. And so is he one of yours? And so, of course, the country doesn't respond because now they got to chase Reverend Sauls' family in Cameroon or wherever the place is. And so the Mexico declares you stateless.
Oh, my God.
They just strip you of your nationality. And then they kick you out after they, make their determinations. And then people are just sleeping outside because, again, they don't have housing. They don't have food. They don't have water or anything. So people are setting up their own. Some people are lucky enough to have tents. And one of the things that we do, again, Sion Goramu has been so fantastic on this, our legal manager and staff attorney, in terms of going back and continuing to go back. And we purchase tents for folks because people are not trying to live in Tapachula. Right. You have people that are semi sort of living in Tijuana as well as the people that are just in, it's in trouble. Right. In Tapachula, no one is trying to live there. Right. No one. Right. And so
because of the conditions, clearly. Because
of the conditions. So people just want a tent because they're trying to get out of here and be gone. Right. They don't want any sense of permanency. And so they're literally dependent on folks showing up and cooking. The church has stopped doing that now. And so they were there. They were told for a month or so. Some people have been there for over 6 months. Right. Some people have been there since March. Okay. And so the situation is bad enough in the sense that they are living in these terrible conditions that Mexico is not helping to deal with. But the added issue is that they're, because these folks don't speak Spanish, they don't know and understand what's happening. And Mexico is exploiting that. They're exploiting the fact that you have people who don't know what the system is here, who don't have attorneys to help them understand the system. And even if they did, the attorneys would be speaking Spanish, right? And so what the African people decided to do, African migrants in particular, as opposed to other migrants, and even other black migrants, they decided, we actually have been organizing and protesting in our own countries, so we're about to do that here. Mm-hmm. And so they organized themselves. When I say this, my heart fills with such pride.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
The resilience, you know what I'm saying? The resilience and the resistance, like I always say, at the border, whether it be in Tijuana or Tapachula, is black and more than likely Cameroonian. Right. But they formed an African Assembly of Migrants as a political assembly. Mm-hmm. They have 15 countries. They held elections and elected people to lead their countries. They then issued a demand letter explaining to the Mexican government, explaining all that they have been through in their journey just to get to Mexico, explaining the humanitarian crisis that they're experiencing in Mexico, and making one demand: let our people go.
My Lord.
That's it. Let our people go. We just want to go up north. We're not asking for you to give us housing. We're not asking for cars. We just want to be able to keep going forward. Right. We've made it this far without all that stuff. We just want to keep going forward because our goal is the U.S. or Canada. It is not to stay here.
Right.
And so they had a 45-minute press conference. But before this, they engaged in straight up protests. They laid their bodies down in the street in front of the detention center to try to keep buses from coming through. They just had a few Mexican police. Then it became more Mexican police. Then the Mexican government sent their National Guard, and it was Mexican police and National Guard. And so by the end of August, when I saw these images, excuse me, on the air, being sent, not on the air, but being sent to me by people on the ground, I was like, we got to go.
Right.
We got to go. One moment.
Yeah. And I think that's when you were able to, to coordinate with even some more organizers and influencers.
Right. And so we coordinated with Tia Oso, who used to work as national organizer with Baji. And she hooked us up, put out the word. We got word back from Kendrick Sampson when his organization Build Power. He's an actor. He's an activist. I know him also because I've trained him personally with Justice Warriors for Black Lives and legal observing and other techniques that we need as we're out here in these streets. And he was like, yes, I'll come down. And so we went down, we interviewed folks, video interviewed, convinced people to speak to us. We spoke to a woman who made the travel, talked about having to climb a wall and this and that with her 7 children and her husband, 3 years old to teenage. I was like, some of us can't go to Chuck E. Cheese, you feel me?
Wow.
With more than 3 kids. Yeah. And you did that trek. A sister from Cameroon, a brother from Cameroon, another brother from Ghana, a brother from the Congo who was fabulous in his speech. And he gave us, the understanding. And we talked a little bit about this before. He said, look, we're being held in a state of dotage. He's speaking French.
Yeah.
And he's like, what they're doing is criminal. It's criminal. And they're holding us in a state of dotage. He was very expressive.
Now, what does dotage mean?
Dotage means holding people in a state, storing something. When you store something with no intent of using it. So as Zeddy Yoon said, it's not even like hoarding. Hoarding is better because at least when you're hoarding, you think you're going to use it. That's why you're hoarding it, as you pointed out, right? Yeah. But with dotage, it's like you're just holding us for no reason. And they were all clear, every last one of them, that the culprit in this was 44 and a half, right? They're furious with the Mexican government because they're saying, look, you resisted the physical wall, right? He also said you were going to build a wall and pay for it.
Right.
Somehow there was no trade or foreign policy or trade policy he could throw at you to make you do that. But when it comes to, creating a humanitarian crisis for Black and Indigenous people, you're with it. Right. You're willing to do it. So clearly you bear some blame and some need for accountability. But they were clear that AMLO, right, President of Mexico, that he's responding to Trump. Right. And when they declared the criminality of the Mexican government in violating its own laws and international law, they also declared the illegality of the U.S. government in violating U.S. law, because U.S. has also signed on to this refugee acts and violating international law. And they were very clear. Right. And so they've been held so long. The government kind of tried to trick them here and there. Finally, people said they were going to leave. And a group of, hundreds, there's 3,500, mind you, African migrants that are in Tapachula. A group of hundreds decided that they were going to try to get to the U.S. by sea. Because, African people are going to try to figure it out. So they said, oh, you won't let us walk? No problem. We'll get in a boat. But unfortunately, the boat capsized and people died and people were injured. And so the following day, again, resistance. They made an effort to just walk on the land. Like, forget it. We're just going to caravan. And what I loved about it is when you look at the images, indigenous people joined them. The indigenous people finally, with the death of some of our folks, realized, hey, yeah, these people are fighting for. It's only so long you can see people fighting and suffering, being tortured, etc., when you don't realize I got to jump in this too. Right. And so they were met by the police and they were met by the National Guard. And so, there's an image I can't get out of my head of that little boy in the stroller, being held.
I'm going to ask Laurent to put that last picture up again so that folk can see that picture, just the image, when they were walking. There you have it. If you can see just really the military or the police.
Yes, that's who that is. Yes.
Right behind them, in terms of just the intimidation being provided, the oppression that and the repression that they're experiencing. In terms of that's going on in Tapachula
right now.
Around that, right now.
Right now.
I know we have to wrap up, but what are some next steps quickly? If you want to just any thoughts on some next steps?
Yes.
What can we do? And then we want to also let folk know that all of the reports that we refer to, you can get all those reports on www.blackalliance.org, right?
Right. Or if you want to type less, www.baji.org.
Okay.
You can also go to stateofblackimmigrants.org.
Okay.
And that'll lead you directly to the reports as well.
Right.
We right now are in a mode in which we want to take it to the next level.
Okay.
In terms of what the organizing is, both in the San Diego area and the Tijuana area and Tapachula. And so, every year we have our Giving Tuesday. And this year our Giving Tuesday is around what we're calling our border work. And again, that border is extending now all the way into Central America. And so, folks, you can look out for that. You can go to our website, in particular this Tuesday, and you can donate directly to us. If you know folks that, have funds, because we'll take from $1 to $1 million, right? Then, please let people know this is a worthy cause. This is a cause that is...
This is a life and death cause.
Absolutely. Yes. And we cannot depend on the Mexican government or the U.S. government in terms of the executive at this point to do anything about it. And so, again, Giving Tuesday, which is the 2nd, I believe, of December, that Tuesday right after Thanksgiving, go to www.baji.org, BAJI.org. And please give and share that information.
I'm giggling at Thanksgiving instead of Thanksgiving. That's
right.
A whole other subject we can't get into. But this is some serious stuff, folk. And it is a crisis, a humanitarian crisis. And it is so, critical for us to be aware of it. You have all the websites. This will continue to play on YouTube. We have a link about today's, program if you want to get that and also share it, so that we can, mobilization starts with education. That's a key piece. And once you educate it, you can't go back anymore because you now have the knowledge to be able to see how you can then move, towards, agitation and then from there, into transformation. I want to thank my sister, my kin, warrior, Nana Jamfi, just for her commitment and just the important work that she continues to do. You can count on our support. However, we can activate, our network.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on.
Yes,
thank you. I'm
absolutely.
glad I was able to come. Thank you so much.
So just in closing here, Faith Without Borders, it is important for you to know that the significance of this name, Faith Without Borders, because, we believe that no human being is illegal. Borders, of course, were established in so many ways, by way of, a racial exploitation, a racial identity, and of course, racial capitalism in so many ways, and we see how that continues to play out in so many ways as we move forward, and also the reason why we have thought leaders, activists such as Nana and others on here, because for us it is really a connecting analysis with action. That is so important. A messed up analysis will result in messed up action. Short-sighted analysis will result in short-sighted action. I know, as activists, we always want to just, get into the action, but it is so important to get that analysis. And the Black Alliance for Just Immigration provides that analysis and then bridges the analysis with some strategic action. And so we're really excited about that, as we do, the work that we need to do. We believe that whatever your faith tradition is, liberate it from any borders, that seek to, limit it, because in the end, it is about how do we celebrate and affirm the humanity and the dignity of all people, including, the integrity of creation as we do the work that we need to do. So thank you for joining us. This has been Faith Without Borders, and looking forward to seeing you next time. Let's continue to work towards a more just and fair society. Thank you.